Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles, and you're getting 3 for the price of 1 today, although they're 3 kind of small ones for the price of 1 kind of, big one. First of all, we're taking a look at Frosty Box here in the British Tier 8 destroyer HMS Lightning. He's contesting a cap right at the start of the match, and he's not doing it alone. And I don't just mean that the cap's contested, so there's obviously an enemy destroyer lurking around in there somewhere as well. Frosty Box is accompanied by the American Tier 10 destroyer, the USS Gearing. This is of course a Tier 10 battle, and Frosty Box is bottom tier. There's the Gearing, he's gotten his torpedoes away. Frosty Box is just taking it easy, waiting to see what happens. Enemy Neptune spotted? Well, he's not the one contesting the cap, not yet at least. Missouri spotted? He's not the one contesting the cap. Gearing spotted. That might mean there's more than one enemy destroyer in here. Well anyway, torpedoes away. Friendly Gearing smokes up, starts shooting at the enemy Gearing. Frosty Box isn't spotted. So there's no reason for him to share the Gearing smokescreen, and there's no reason for him to use his own, so he starts backing up, putting a bit of distance between himself and that there American smokescreen, because as we all know, smokescreens attract torpedoes. At the same time, that doesn't mean he can't do anything to help the Gearing out. He's popped his own hydro, so the Gearing will have advance warning of any enemy torpedoes. Now, we mentioned that we weren't convinced the enemy Gearing was the only destroyer in this cap circle, and it turns out that it wasn't, although it is now, because one of those torpedoes found the enemy Asashio. So that's nice to know. And sure enough, are those Gearing torpedoes or Neptune torpedoes? And why only 2 of them? Because there's nothing at Tier 8, 9 or 10 that has a launcher that only puts 2 torpedoes into the water. Although the Neptune could have individually fired single torpedoes, or somebody's fired torpedoes that hit something. But this is a mystery that we're going to have to worry about later, because right now we've been pinged by Alaska radar. And there are 4 enemy ships shooting at us, although thanks to that Neptune, there are now only 2. And those are definitely Gearing torpedoes. Oh, and there are the surviving Neptune torpedoes with a very suspiciously Gearing-shaped gap in their spread pattern. Those of you who are new to World of Warships from World of Tanks, what happened there was the Neptune fired through the Gearing smokescreen to get to us and torpedoed his own Gearing. But when you do enough damage to friendlies in World of Warships, that damage gets reflected back onto you. So the Neptune effectively not only torpedoed the Gearing, he also torpedoed himself. Next up, we've got one from Vin Squeak in the USS Phoenix, the American Tier 4 light cruiser. Vin Squeak, in company with a friendly Kolberg, the German cruiser, has managed to sweep all the way around this flank. We're quite far into this battle. He has crushed his enemies, driven them before him, and heard the lamentation of their women. And now he's in a position, well, bit of good news, bit of bad news. He's in a position to enjoy a very tasty crossfire on a whole bunch of enemies. But he's in a light cruiser, and that's a whole bunch of enemies, including 2 battleships, as well as a couple of carriers. So maybe it would be a good idea to just, fall back until the battleships at least are uninterested and start shooting at somebody else. And that at least appears to be his initial plan, because the thing about the Phoenix, I mean, it's not a bad ship. And by Tier 4 cruiser standards, it's perfectly fine. And it's one of the few American cruisers that actually has torpedoes. A lot of people forget that about American cruisers. Some of them do have torpedoes. They're not particularly good torpedoes. They only have a 4.5 kilometer range, but hey, that's 4.5 kilometers more torpedo range than most American cruisers. But the thing about the Phoenix is that, like its big sister at Tier 5, the USS Omaha, it's made completely out of citadels, and it has tissue paper for armour. And hits from battleships tend to result in more or less instant deletions. So Vinny here turned away, the battleships lost interest, but the carriers gonna have to do a bit of torpedo beating here. A nice narrow ship, the Phoenix. Unfortunately, he is still being targeted, so Tempting though it may be to turn around and get some distance between himself and the enemy ships down there, if he does that he's going to have to give broadside to them, and, well, he's made out of citadels. So that could have extremely nasty consequences, plus he can't really execute a turn to starboard, because he'll run into the torpedoes. Executing a turn to port would involve giving broadside to a whole bunch of enemies. You're in a kind of screwed if you do, screwed if you don't situation with a ship like the Phoenix here. Because its armour is so bad, and because its citadel is so pronounced, you really don't want to be giving broadside to anybody and giving them the opportunity to hit you with the citadel. However, because the armour is so bad and the ship is so narrow, a battleship caliber shell that hits you in the broadside of this ship, depending on the range, can often simply over-penetrate before the fuse arms, resulting in minimal damage. The thing is, if it doesn't over-penetrate, yeah, the consequences are fatal. And even if you are nosing straight in or heading straight away from an enemy in the Phoenix, presenting the smallest possible target profile towards a battleship shooting at you, if just one of those shells does hit and has to travel down the entire length of the ship, it's guaranteed to not over-penetrate. The fuse is going to arm and it's probably going to go off right in the middle of that big fat juicy citadel. So Vinny here has pretty much decided, fuck it, because Federal Trade Commission, this video is not aimed towards children. Chicks dig scars and glory lasts forever, so let's go for it. Torpedoes in the water, because everybody forgets the Phoenix has them. Vinny isn't actually expecting to survive this encounter, and he doesn't, but the Danae on the starboard side has managed to overturn and steer his way back into two of the torpedoes, and two of the torpedoes on the port side find the Gangut as well. Totally worth it. Finally, we have Icebreaker MM in the French Tier 9 battleship, the Alsace, named of course after that famous French fashion designer, Gianni Alsace, obviously. Well, after a couple of minutes of mostly pointless just dicking around in this Tier 9 ranked battle, he's French, he's got cigarettes to smoke, he's got mistresses to satisfy, foreigners to sneer at for not speaking French at acceptable standards. He's supposed to be going on strike today to force his employer to pay for a second apartment for his second mistress, and if this battle goes on much longer he'll have to do it in his own time and not his employer's, and that's simply unacceptable. So he simply decides, fuck it, and decides to go for it. Now, I am not suggesting you attempt to replicate what you see Icebreaker doing here, because this is kind of like those situations in World of Tanks when there's 4 of you around one side of the hill and 2 of the enemy around the other side of the hill, and if just one of you were to go for it, it would be suicidal. But if you could all go together, you would crush your enemies, drive them before you, and hear the lamentation of their women. So somebody, and it's usually the medium tank, I don't know why, but it's usually the medium tank, says, come on guys, let's do it, and charges off around the corner. And then the 3 heavy tanks with him just kind of watch him die, and then all look at each other and say, well, go on then, who's next? While the medium driver, who's now obviously very, very dead, and also very, very upset, is forced to content himself with merely coming up with all kinds of strange and interesting theories about the ancestry of those heavy tank drivers. And you see it happen in World of Warships as well. Somebody has a great idea, which only turns out to be a great idea if everybody does it at the same time and does it together. And turns out to be a very, very bad idea if you're the only one doing it. And so you charge off round the corner of an island and get yourself obliterated within the space of a few seconds, while the rest of your team, safe on the other side of the island, all kind of look at you thinking, what the hell is he doing? And yet that's not what's happening here. The thing is, at no point did Icebreaker actually stop and say to his team, I'm going to go for it, or you're going to back me up. He just did it. I mean, he's a busy Frenchman. He has to see his first mistress in half an hour. She lives on the other side of Paris. And have you seen the traffic in Paris at this time of day? So, he just went for it, and damn the consequences. But his team backed him up. His team saw that he was going to create an opening for them, and they went for it with him. And the ones that didn't see it were told by the other members of the team, let's back him up. And unlike the enemy team here, who are all just basically scattering shots in all kinds of different directions at whatever target they see first, Icebreaker's team are actually focusing their fire and taking these ships down one at a time. And I'm pretty sure Icebreaker was not expecting to still be alive at this point. I mean, he drove around that corner right into the middle of 5 enemy ships. In a game mode where there are only 6 enemy ships. I mean, and all but 2 of them are dead, and he isn't. He's taken a beating, obviously, but that Alsace up ahead of him isn't going to be able to sink him from that angle, not quickly enough anyway. The Jean Bart off on his port quarter had the opportunity to finish him with a broadside just now, but didn't quite manage to pull it off, and if he wants to get the second shot off, because all of his guns are in the front of his ship, he's going to have to swing the ship around, and that means giving broadside to the Missouri and the Musashi to the south. So of course that's exactly what he does. The Musashi slaps him in the broadside with a couple of 18-inch shells just at exactly the same time that Icebreaker finishes off the enemy Alsace. From the moment when the enemy team suffered their first casualty, the Iowa, until the last enemy ship sinking, no more than 2.5 minutes had elapsed. That's the fastest team collapse I think I have ever seen in a game of World of Warships. So, thank you very much to everybody who contributed today. I hope everybody else enjoyed it, because that's it. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.